to today's presentation. We're going to talk about how to secure a network. And let me just preface it by saying this. I will not be discussing BYOD. So I know we have a lot of BYOD discussions, so this is going to exclude BYOD, but the principles can certainly apply to BYOD. My name is Trevor Pressley, and I am IT Security Manager for the City of Raleigh, and I've had that role for the last 4 years. What I'd like to do right now is impart some of the lessons learned, some of the things I experienced during the recent security redesign, and hopefully those are takeaways from you. So at the end of the day, I'd like you to walk away from here with not only IT security principles, but also information assurance principles, which is a different animal. When there is an information assurance principle, I'll point that out to make a differentiator, and then you can make the judge or the call whether it applies to you or not, or is something sustainable for you. So right now we're talking about, and this is necessary, I think all of us know this, but we have to identify this. You know, what's going on in the cybersecurity space? And the game has absolutely changed. The motives are different. Money is a motivating factor right now. The days of hacking for notoriety or to face your website are over. People are after your business or after your money. And these are some of the drivers. You know, government-sponsored hacking. We're going to talk about that, what that's considered. There are also criminal organizations who are hacking. And then you have hacktivism. And as local municipalities, that's something we have to take into consideration because civil unrest can create a necessity for potentially an organization to hack us. So these are the contributing factors, not to mention a downturn in the economy. So know thy enemy. You need to understand the methods and methodologies of hackers to secure your environment. And it's typically broken down into 4 phases. These are the 4 phases: incursion, discovery, capture, and then sending it back home. And we're going to talk about these phases just very briefly. So what happens in the incursion phase? Well, this is where they're kind of evaluating your network. Light scans, touching, looking for ports, potential vulnerabilities, seeing if you have any password issues, any changes to all passwords. Maybe look for SQL injections. We're going to talk about that briefly. Also malware. Typically, this phase is difficult to detect because it's very light touch. You have to have very sensitive detection mechanisms to detect this. But they're scoping out your terrain to see where they can get into your environment. Now you have script kiddies who may run an application. We have very sophisticated hackers that may use a SQL injection. So it scales. And I would like to say this as well. If you have a question, a comment, please don't save it to the end. Interrupt me, raise your hand, debate, argue. I'm okay with that. So if you have something you want to say, or if I even see you look like you have a question, I might call on you and say, you have a question. So please feel free. I want this to be an interactive engagement. Discovery. Now during the discovery phase of a hack, now they found your weakness. They're seeing where you're vulnerable. So now they start to exploit those vulnerabilities. They map out your environment once they get inside. They want to know where your pieces are, where are your systems, where are your weaknesses, reconnaissance. They're checking out everything. They want to identify your environment so they can remain as stealthy as possible. Social hacks. They may call up your help desk, ask questions, put together a profile of a potential user to hack. This is a very dangerous stage because they're actually looking at what you have and do not have in place. And this is where they actually go after your systems. Your data is secured. Rootkits. Who knows what a rootkit is? Take a stab. If you had a comment on what rootkit is, or?
It's just a nice little piece of software that gets on there before everything else is on your computer and takes it over so you don't know what's going on.
Yep. And it's installed and it's hidden from you. And they're very difficult to detect and remove. And the purpose of a rootkit is to elevate the privileges of that system. So they can gain senior level or privilege access and you have absolutely no idea. And then they attempt to remain hidden. There's a federal government case out there which they were hacked. They were inside the system for 10 years. 10 years. Typically, it's about a year once they gain access to your systems. And the final phase of this, they send the information home. And it's a continual process. It doesn't stop. Any questions about the 4 phases of a breach? Sound familiar? You heard that before? Yeah. For some, this is nothing new. IT security goals really boil down to three things, if we think about it. To protect, detect, and recover. Now, as IT folks, what do we typically put most of our emphasis in? Protect, exactly. Now, I don't want to confuse this, because if you're an information security person, you're saying, wait, what about confidentiality, integrity, and availability? That's a broader scope, but right now we're talking about IT security, protect. And we're going to talk about some of the means you protect your environment. Look familiar? IDS, IPS, intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, firewalls, antivirus, MDM. That's my blurb. Okay, I'm stopping the BYD. Email gateway, secure web gateways, DLP. This is nothing new, right? So why are you here? You're not here to hear about this. Nothing new. But this is what we do when we try to protect our environment. Detection. We want visibility in our environment. You can't detect what you can't see. Log aggregation. Who likes sifting through thousands and thousands of lines of logs to figure out what happened? You ever take her?
Done it many times.
Yep, it's no fun, is it?
No.
Exactly. What about event correlation? We can go through logs, but if you have 4 or 5 different disparate systems, it's very difficult to correlate what actually happened. Real-time and passive, that's scanning. Schedule scans, passive scans, maybe when something happens, you protect the scan, and vulnerability management. And then we have recovery. This is bringing the systems back up. Now, these are the typical technologies used during protection phase. We talk about IDS, IPS. We have signature-based IPS. I think we're all familiar with antivirus, same principle. What happens? Your vendor writes code for it, sends it down to your intrusion prevention. It's updated automatically, it happens for you. What about behavioral-based? Anyone familiar with behavioral-based IPS, IDS? Takers? Say not?
It's just a mechanism of watching particular flows or a sequence of activities that may add up to something that you wouldn't have recognized individually, but you look at the pattern of behavior together and you recognize they had probably put those things together as something bad.
Excellent, exactly. So it's looking at your traffic to see what is the normal behavior of your traffic over a period of time. If there's an anomaly occurs, it identifies it. If there's a problem with behavioral-based IPS, it screws stuff up. So most vendors stay away from it. If you talk to most vendors, we do signature-based because behavioral-based screws stuff up. The first second or the first time you update an application, it changes your behavior. Guess what? You just broke something. Also, we have firewalls. Everyone's familiar with firewalls, right? Port 80, NEA, IP address, DMZ, not by default. It's been around for years. First generation, nothing new there. Email gateways. Anyone have like a next generation email gateway or email gateway? Everyone has an email gateway. Designed to stop spam, viruses. Yep. Secure web gateways. Web 2.0, reputation-based filtering, antivirus. Again, nothing new. Everyone has this in this room probably at some level. Does anyone not have IDS or IPS in their environment? You're embarrassed. You can kind of wink at me. No one else can see you wink. Okay. It's not surprising that many do not. So how are we doing? So now we have a network diagram. This is what you came to talk about, the network. Now, I will say this. This is a very basic network. And for some who do not have a network background, you're like, okay, don't do this to me. For some who may have an application background, it may look very different. For the sake of discussion, this is a network. So we talked about a couple of different things here. We talked about, going to the very top, you have gateway routers or gateway switches connected to your IPS. You know, have high availability for the availability side of the house. Coming down, you may have a load balancer. You may have some type of appliance that provides some type of proxying function that will usually go further in the network. In this particular case, this is a DNS load balancer for high availability. If you're messing around with BGP, be my guest. Going a little further, you have default gateway, you have IPS, you have firewall, another firewall for DMZ traffic. You have some extranet traffic for DR, extranet over here. Does that look familiar? Does anyone like, okay, what are you talking about, Trevor? That typically what we see in most environments? Am I missing anything, potentially? Pretty familiar, right? So we look at these things, but there are deficiencies within this particular environment. So if we have a signature-based IPS and you have a zero-day attack, Well, not a signature yet, right? So that's been exploited. What about firewalls? Well, guess what port 80 has just levy coming right through? Malware. I think all of us know that. So that's been exploited. What about email gateways? Has anyone noticed a lot of phishing through email? Is your secure next generation email filter picking that up?
Not so good.
No. No. And we constantly get calls. This is a phishing scam. It doesn't, what's going on? This should be spam. Well, it's not spam because for some reason they've gamed the system. Whatever our filters are using for triggers, they're being gamed right now. So if your IP address isn't changing 20 times in a day, your reputation isn't low, your domain hasn't changed, and your reputation is still good across server base, well, guess what? We're going to take that information in. So there's a problem there. And then you secure web gateways. Now we have Web 3.0. Now Web 2.0 gateways, in not too near future, may become obsolete. But this is the environment that we're protecting against. So this is what happens. We create this false sense of security. Has anyone been to your aquarium and seen those horseshoe crabs? I like to use this analogy. I use it in my new employee orientation. You know, it's hard on top, you turn it over, his legs are spiny, he's vulnerable. And that's the sense of false sense of security we develop for ourselves. So where do you start? Needle in a haystack. That's a big needle, that's an even bigger haystack, isn't it? So we have to take on a layered security approach. We have to look at security holistically. Even though we had multiple systems in there, we have an IPS, a firewall, even a proxy, secure web gateway, it appears to be layered, but the reality is it really isn't. So we think about policies and procedures. And I'm going to exclude physical security. It has to start with policy and procedures, and we're going to talk about that very shortly. But also layered, perimeter, internal network, application data. We're going to talk about some of those things going on, and we're going to revert back to this diagram as we discuss this. Any questions about this? Has anyone seen this model before, a similar model? If you haven't, then you're going to get your exposure here. So understand the business. So when I originally embarked on our security design, I'm not suggesting this to everyone, but this is what I did. We interviewed our HR, assistant director, HR manager, our internal auditor, public utilities, our utility billing department, our legal department, public affairs department, our finance department. I asked them a very plain question. What keeps you up at night? What are your concerns within the organization? And I captured all that data. I interviewed our IT staff. What keeps you up at night? And I captured all that data. I looked for commonalities within the organization to find out where are the stress points within the organization from the business side of the house. Because for me, I'm in a vacuum. My perception of what the issues are and their perception is totally different. And once I captured that information, I started looking for the synergies. Well, if there's a problem here, here, and here, then perhaps it's a global problem. And make it a non-technical discussion. Just your problems. Well, we don't want to talk about problems. Don't talk about firewalls. Let's talk about what are your problems. And they explain it to me in their layman terms. And also, why is it important to interview those particular departments? Anyone want to take a stab at that? They're our key departments for our sensitive information. What happens if we take our water? Ain't good. Finance, HR, sensitive information, internal audit. So it's important to understand who your sensitive departments are and talk to them. So we have to take a risk-based approach. Now these two slides I mentioned, information assurance, these are more information assurance concepts. Understand what our risk profiles in the organization, and I do not set the risk tolerance. I would be fooling myself if I thought I did. Our senior management sets the risk tolerance. If our CIO says, I don't care about our systems being wide open, it's my system, I want it wide open, I can't trump him. I can't trump the city manager. I can't trump my CIO. You can try to influence them, but the reality is our senior level management sets the risk tolerance for the organization. And we have to understand what that risk tolerance is. And it's important because this discussion helps us prioritize scope, budget, and resources. We could not layer the entire IT department or systems in the IT department. It's cost prohibitive. Funding just isn't there. So we have to understand what's critical to the organization, and that's where we put our dollars at. Now, would you buy a safe for your home that's the size of this wall to stick in your social security cards, your insurance documents, and your pictures of your kids? Or would you buy a safe that's the right size for those documents? One, it's cost prohibitive. You can't fit the darn thing in your house, and it's some 800-pound gorilla taking up someone's room. You right-size your personal security for your needs. We right-size our organizational security based on what's critical to the organization. And that's a risk-based approach. Knowing what the risks are and addressing those risks. These are the things that are sensitive in our organization. And I'd venture to say about all of us being a local municipality, this is pretty consistent. Social security numbers, credit card information, HIPAA, trade secrets, all of us should be concerned about this information, because we all know that most of our information is public record. 90, 95%, we're after that 5%. And that's what we really want to secure. Again, reverting back to the security in depth. We've understand some of the needs of the organization. I captured that, kind of understood what some of the pain points were, addressed some policies and procedures, data classification policy, access management policy, force and password policy, the application assessment. These are things I had to do to kind of create some of the issues. And we have to think about something. I was just talking to a colleague of mine. It takes forever for a policy to be written, vetted, and approved. Okay? There's a such thing called cultural policies. If your organization does something well and it's not written, then why spend up the time to write a policy to meet some type of compliance or assessment? So for example, when I walked in the door of the city of Raleigh, they did a good job of patch management. Patch Tuesday comes out, it patches stuff right away. Taking the systems down, contacting the system owners, rebooting it, patching it, had that process nailed down. So why am I going to spend up 3 months to write a policy to address something that we're already doing a good job of? I'd rather spend the time writing a policy of something we do not do a good job of. Because when it comes time to implement the security, you're going to get all kind of pushback because you're changing culture. So use your time wisely, write policies that address business needs, not necessarily compliance. Because the reality is, compliance will get you to a certain point, but business needs take you beyond the compliance requirements. So if you're going to spend your time writing a policy, address a need in the organization that you feel like needs to be fixed, because it takes a long time to go through that process, and you don't want to waste your time writing a policy for something you're already doing a great job of. So we've talked to the business units, getting to understand the risk profile. Now you have to be honest with yourself. Okay, where is my organization sitting as far as their maturity? Okay, I want to implement, I'm going to lock it down. NSA type stuff, DOD, I'm going to lock it down. But to do that, you have to be over here. If you're over here, it's not going to work. You have to understand the maturity model of your organization. You know, if the risks don't fit, don't try to put in a policy for it. What that means is if your organization has a high tolerance for breaches, in other words, a high risk tolerance, it's not the culture, you can't try to implement stuff that's over here. The first time you break stuff up, or you try to turn the culture around and do a 180, you're going to get a lot of pushback. You're going to get pushback from senior management. So you have to step through these different levels with your security. You know, I was talking to someone, a vendor, and he said, well, Trevor, that's interesting. Most people are trying to lock down the MDM. I'm not trying to lock it down. I said, well, I can't lock down. So Wild Wild West, how are you going to lock it down? You get all kind of pushback. You have to gradually implement controls, get the organization used to it, implement more controls, get them used to it, gradually lock them down to an appropriate level. You can't go from 0 to 100. So that's important to understand. Honest assessment of where your organization is relative to security. So, another thing, after you understand what's going on in your environment, look at industry trends. Find peers in the industry, whether it's in the city. I get a lot of information from banks, CISOs at a bank, because they've nailed down this process for many, many years. So I talk to them, find out what they're doing, they find out what we're doing, because we have a lot more latitude than they do. We can implement things a lot quicker, refresh equipment a lot quicker. They've got some Lotus Notes and Novell stuff still in their environments that they've had for years because it works. It costs money because they're driven by the dollar. We refresh a lot more often. So they ask me about technical things. I ask them about policy things. Security journals, nonprofit reports, and trusted partners. So this is some of the things I like to use. Go to information like this if you have to talk to someone. Find a third-party agnostic report. Help them appreciate, look, we're worried about people inside. Show them reports like this. Give a little teeth. Application vulnerabilities. We're going to talk about this. Understanding, again, what's critical to your organization. If we're doing or investing all of our money in network-based security, and really what's going out in the landscape or application-based threats, then we've missed the mark. So we have to understand what's going out in the threat landscape of the rest of the world. We have to get outside of our box and ask people and research and find out. So much to my surprise, I have a network background. I'm looking at networks. So when I started researching, I'm like, ooh, this is a gap. I don't know why the application security is. I have to educate myself. So if we look at these numbers, 51% of companies had at least one web application security incident in the last 18 months. That's a lot. Anyone use an SDLC in their environment? We'll talk about how you can mitigate that. Anyone ever heard of OWASP? Open Web Application Security Project? They're a nonprofit project designed securing applications. We're going to look at the OWASP top 10. That's the OWASP top 10. And if you're trying to secure your environment, if you've never heard this or seen this before, you really missed the mark. Because we talked about malware coming in through port 80. But this is where the majority of our hackers are coming from. We looked at that slide before with 51% last 18 months. And these are not mom and pop shops. These are Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies who reported this on their Verizon report. OWASP top 10. And guess what? True hackers know this like the back of their hand. And if we are not educated in what they're doing, we talked about 4 phases, then we're putting ourselves at disadvantage. Number 1 is SQL injections. So understanding what's out there, not just in your own silo. So here we're going back to, where do you start? We're continuing down. Now we're talking about application security. Who's heard about APT, Advanced Persistent Threats? Anyone want to take a stab at what it is? What is APT? I'm sorry. Targeting. Okay. Who's targeting it? We know where it's coming from? So APT are sponsored attacks, typically on government, municipalities, state agencies. There's a lot of talk about APT. We have to understand that there are actually people who are after our stuff, our assets. Insider threats, application vulnerabilities. What are some of the new attack vectors that are happening? We talked about port 80. We talked about how they're writing code to run through our existing security policies. We talked about motives. These are today's common vulnerabilities. So, with that said, I'd like to put this out there. What are some of your challenges you're facing in your organization? Anyone throw some things at me from a security perspective? What are some things you would like to see improve in your environment?
User education. They gotta get it. They gotta understand that there's real value in it, and it should not just be difficult. But to them, a lot of times, it's just being difficult.
Yep.
You're putting too many hoops on me.
Yeah.
And it's tough. It's tough to find that. We have to talk to them in terms of your personal information. It's your money. It's your bank account. What if it's, and it's hard. It's hard to get, at every level of the user, from the frontline people up to the department heads. It's tough to get that user buy-in to real security.
Yep. Good point. Excellent point.
The amount of time that you have to spend on it.
Okay. You said security measures that impact the business.
Or the system efficiencies itself, like maintenance or systems are available to certain users, those types of things. It can impact your ability, your effectiveness in your system.
And I have to,
That's a challenge.
and I have to agree with Renee. We work at the city of Raleigh, so I'm not sure if she's taking a dig at me or not. But we'll talk offline. But she's right. The impact. I'm sorry. You said something, sir.
Just the amount of time that you have to dedicate to that when you're responsible for everything else as well.
That's a big problem. Time, resource. Yes.
I was doing like a self-audit, like I'm not network savvy.
Yes.
I've had to learn a little bit, I'm programming in my background, but I'm a one person IT shop, so how would I start an audit? How would I figure out where my weaknesses are?
Well-
I inherited what I have, so it works, so I don't want to break it.
One thing I try to do with our organization is have a third-party audit because you're right. So for me, I'm dedicated to security, but the perception is I own every aspect of security in the organization. And it's impossible. I have a network background, and I can bleed over on the application side of something. I've done some things there. So there are gaps in my personal skill sets. So what I typically do is I augment that with professional services, or since you're a one-person shop, you can't really turn to a peer. But my recommendation would be to have a third-party assessment done.
Where would I go to find somebody to do that?
I can talk to you offline. We can't talk about vendors, but yeah, there's someone state contract as well. So you don't have to go through the hoops of bidding it out.
Yeah, I'd like to know
Yeah.
what other people have done in my situation, just to try to figure out what kind of holes I have. If I have any, because it seems pretty locked down and it seems to work fine, but
And we're going to talk about something that you can do from a technical perspective that can help you with that. And we're going to get to that. So we had time, we had business impacting, and user engagement as far as education. We had just skill set gaps, right? Anything else? Yes.
Well, operational security, not one person may not see what they do as important, like, well, no one's gonna go after this information, but they don't understand that it's a piece of a puzzle, that once they get all the pieces, that they don't understand their little piece opens up a lot of stuff.
Exactly. So are you speaking more about not understanding the vulnerabilities of the environment, like how one you're as strong as a weak
It
link?
goes more into education of the users, that how important the little piece of the puzzle is.
Gotcha. Yep. Good point. Any other comments? Who knows what's going on in the network? I'm sorry? It works. What's up? Get in it. Everyone knows what's going on in the network? What applications are running? That's a good challenge. So, we get to play, let's design a network. Okay, so we talked about this. This is the network. These are things we talked about. Now, when we talked about this originally, did anyone think that I left something off? Is there something in their environment that I left off? Remote users. We have some remote sites here. Now we're gonna make assumptions here, so let's play assumptions. We have users. So we're gonna make that assumption. We have some users. And yes.
Have just an update. One of the things we're dealing with is like Adobe updates constantly
Yeah.
coming in.
Yes.
I heard that that's going to be the future. That's going to be the future target for hackers is to ride on those and enter in kind of
Yep.
unseemly.
Yep. So we have another issue. Malware coming in stealthy, right? We talked about things bypassing our secure web gateways and our email gateways. So stealthy malware, that's a good point. And I'm sorry, did you say something, sir? In the front? Somebody.
They're cloaked as
Yeah,
a
Oh.
that's communication.
I'm sorry?
They're cloaked as a plugin or
Yes.
something like that. Yeah.
Yes. Being closed. Any other comments? Is there anything you have to about patch management or something we left off here?
VPNs, I don't have those services.
Yeah, VPN. Yep. So we can make an assumption that everyone's VPNing to the firewall. Is that a fair assumption? Through the internet, right? Is that okay? When you VPN, you're coming, you're turning on this firewall. So we left over VPNs, we have VPNs. Anything else?
Is email okay?
Nope, email is not here. So we're going to make another assumption that we're factoring an email coming in through one of these appliances out here, like a gateway. Anything else? Anything else left over from a security perspective? Okay. So let's play. And I want to make another point. There is a difference in engineering security and architecting security. We're looking at architecting security. Because an architect looks at the whole picture. Someone made a comment about looking at a piece of the pie. Engineers look at a piece of the pie. I'm going to configure my firewall to do this. I don't give a crap about your systems, your workstations, or anything else. I'm configuring this DMZ. Systems people, I'm locking down my passwords. I'm making sure everything default is turned off, and root access and all this stuff. Help desk people, I got antivirus. Don't talk to me anything else but antivirus. I don't care about your firewall. I'm locking down a workstation. Architect is the whole picture. So we're architects, right? I'm sorry? And I said no BYOD, but we can throw it in there. BYOD is in there too. We'll cover BYOD. I mean,
But that's another entry point that I don't see up.
yeah, okay, so we can assume that folks are just connected to here with whatever. Fair enough? But I said no BYOD, so you dragged me to BYOD thing. But that's okay. I'm joking.
I got your money.
Oh, okay, so you didn't hit the preference. I was trying to kill him on BYOD. So, now let's introduce something else, a web proxy. So we want to layer, we talked about layering security. We already talked about how the IPS has signature issues, and we also talked about how firewall open reports. So now you have a web proxy. Now what does a web proxy do? Take a stab, anyone?
Filters the internet content.
Filters the internet content.
Caches up the data.
It caches. What does it do with that session? On a web proxy. It terminates it and opens a new session. So it's sitting in the middle. So you have some intelligence there with the web proxy because no direct packet or session connects to your systems. So it sits in the middle of its termination. And that's another layer of security, right? Because you can do some things when you terminate a packet, especially SSL. I mean, everybody say anything about SSL, but that's because you don't have visibility in your network. If you have visibility in your network, you see how much SSL traffic is going there. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So we've added a layer. We've added a web proxy. What else? A WAF. Anyone familiar with WAF? Web Application Firewall. Now, we talked about people being concerned with their silos. And before I offend anyone, are there any application outside of Renee, developers or application folks in this room? We have one. Two. Just web developers. You're a web developer. Okay. Guys, don't take this man offense to this, please. You guys hate security. You're like the rebels of IT. You're hippies. You hate security. I'm only joking. But typically web developers fight with system people because of what? I want admin rights in the box. No, you can't have admin rights in the box. We want to babysit you when you make a change. So there's a conflict of interest because web developers typically, to me, have a freedom mindset. They're willing. They try different things. And typically, security isn't number one on their list. So what happens? We have vulnerabilities in these applications that make them subjected to SQL injections because typically SDLC is a shakeout vulnerabilities in code. So how do you mitigate that? Well, you have a web application firewall. And what that does, it gets a profile, or establishes a profile of the actual application. It learns, listens, documents, identifies potential issues. Then you go back a month, 3 months, 6 months later, and you enable security with the web application firewall. So what that does, it mitigates potential coding issues within the application. So if there's a SQL injection attack, that will pass right through because SQL injections are legitimate traffic. SQL injection would pass right through because a firewall or IPS typically would not look at that as being malicious traffic because it's attacking the vulnerability of the application, not the network, not the system, the application. But the web application firewall looks at layer 7 security on the box for the application specifically. So do we add another layer there? Now we're looking at vulnerabilities within the actual applications that are running our DMZs, our web servers, our public-facing systems. So have we improved our posture? Now, more layers? Any questions about that? What else? Now we talked about, and you made a good point here. What about our users? So we have users on our internal network, we have users on our remote network. Now for us, this is actually huge because our remote sites, we have over 140. So we have a ton of users out there. But we do have a ton of people inside the network as well, sitting on our LAN or MAN. So what's a next generation firewall? I didn't want to make it too big because it was starting to bleed over, so I just did the old acronym. Gartner defines a next generation firewall as an application aware firewall. It's not port based. It looks at applications, it profiles applications with IPS included, as well as URL filtering. These are next generation firewalls to deal with next generation issues. Now I want to caveat, there's something out there called UTM, the Unified Threat, is it management modules again? I'm sorry? No, it's it's not mitigation, it's the box. Is it management, DM? Management, okay. So where UTM is a box that has intrusion prevention on it, URL filtering on it, and has a firewall, but no application ID, and it's not single pass, but they're not taking all that information and making decisions. So a next generation firewall will take all that information. It takes the URL filtering, potential AV issues, the threats, vulnerabilities, as well as the application, and it gives you a complete picture of what's going on with that packet line. Not a solid picture of this is an IPS signature issue, or this is potentially a firewall blockage. So what we're talking about here is the ability to give you that visibility we talked about that you do not have. So I can look on my next generation firewall, and I can see Renee, sorry Renee, that's what happens. So I can see Renee is having command and control issues and trying to phone home outside. I can see who she's sending it to. I can see what application she's using. I can drill down the application. I can see inside the application. That's the visibility we're talking about. That's going beyond port-based security. Because what happens with port-based firewalls, it comes in through port 80, but it creeps. Port creep. It goes from port 80 to 389. Or to another port. That's attacks of vulnerability. Well, you can't get around that with next generation firewall. It doesn't care about your port. It's looking at your application. And it's thousands of applications that's indexed in there, and it's constantly growing. And there are a lot of features with the next generation firewall. So if you do not have a next generation firewall in your environment, you need to look at a next generation firewall. So I convinced my brother, who's an IT director in the Maryland area, to look at a next generation firewall. He had 2 other incumbents. I said, Derek, you gotta check this out. Trevor, he's big enough. He's 10 years old now. He got me in the IT. He's been my mentor for years. So it's kind of hard for little brother to tell big brother check something out. So I said, come on, Derek, you gotta check it out. Well, I don't know, man. I got this, that, and the other. I said, Derek, trust me, check it out. Give him a little rundown, 5-minute elevator speech. My brother calls me every single day bragging about a particular solution. I can't name the solution, but he brags about it every day. He's been in IT for 20 years. I've been in it for 17. He's his absolute best solution ever purchased. It's critical to have next generation solutions to deal with next generation issues. So, moving on. Place it there too. Again, you're capturing information on the inside as well as going out. You're gaining that visibility. So have we started increasing our security profile? Do we agree? Are we layering? Are we filling those weaknesses and those gaps? Now, you mentioned a good point. Stuff coming in that's going right past our secure web gateways, our email gateways. We have to look at solutions that are signature-less. Not rely on signatures. That can take your malware and exploit it and look at that in a sandbox outside of your environment. That's the rising trend right now. And right now, the existing solutions are having a tough time dealing with it. There are solutions out there that will take your information, look at it outside your organization, and give you feedback as far as if this is malicious or not. So we've addressed a lot of the issues we talked about without getting into a BYOD conversation, right? Basically, we have to look at application-aware solutions because that right now is the biggest gap within most organizations. We have factor improves our visibility. Talk about that here. Look for signature risk detection. Web application firewalls to address vulnerabilities in our systems. And I talked about very briefly a SIM, the application-aware SIM, that can potentially leverage database transaction logs, application transaction logs. These are the things that are key for us, and we talked about the SIM here, for moving forward. So key takeaways, know your gaps. Understand what your security profile is today. Look at what you have in-house and understand the limitations of your existing solutions. Align with the business. Avoid engineering if you can. I know we have a lot of engineers in here, but maybe broaden your mindset. Look at some different philosophies and principles like risk-based security. There is no silver bullet vendor. I promise you, no one is doing it all right now. So we have to unmarry ourselves from vendors and look outside of potentially our comfort zone. And layer the security. Any questions? Yes.
SQL injection.
Yes.
How does the next generation firewall protect that specific?
Well, I would look more for the web application firewall for SQL injections. The next generation firewall can protect against it, and it will identify it. But I like the WAF to look more at application-based vulnerabilities because they're really designed to look at the server itself and understand what's going on with the server. Because what you do is you load a profile on the server, and you understand what's going on with the server, and you make decisions as far as what you can block and not block. So you have a whitelist opportunity to know that's good, that's bad. And then when you enable the profile to start blocking, it's at a server-based level. But next,
So if I did an SQL injection in a text box where I added a question mark and started adding other queries to that, that particular appliance can start to then
yes,
manage
yeah, because it's legitimate code, right? You just,
Yeah, I'm just adding
Yeah.
a query onto another query.
yeah, the web application firewall is what I would use to detect that. The next generation firewall will pick it up and you'll see it, but you know it's that layered approach. I can see it, probably block with the intrusion prevention, but the web application firewall is what I would rely on to block that.
Well, say I use something like curl to,
No, I'm joking. No, go ahead.
say I use something like curl, say there is a vulnerability, now I have a username and password, and can it prevent my little application from attaching to your application?
So, help me out. So you said curl?
Yes, URL. It allows, so what I could do is I could, if I have anybody's username, password, or any information like that, I could drop it into your network, parse out all your, say, all your time clock information.
Yeah.
All your financial records,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. How is that device meant to stop attacks like that?
So we have the layered security approach. So that sounds like more of a detection.
Correct.
Okay, so this is where you have to have log management and event correlation. So you have all of your critical systems as well as potential applications, web application firewall pointing to your SIM. A SIM is a security information event management system. So it takes all that information from all those systems. I kind of glossed over that, I apologize. It takes all that information from all your systems, right? Thousands and thousands of lines of logs and different alerts, and normalizes the traffic so that you can look at a point in time and see everything that happened at noon in your environment. Where you can see applications reporting unusual behavior, web application reporting, because you have to sometimes paint a larger picture to see what's going on in your environment because that one system may not give you enough information. So potentially, if one system is hammering 3 other systems and all those systems are reporting to the SIM, I can see what's going on with 4 systems at a point in time, give me a picture or some analysis of what's going on in my environment. So, like I said, there's no silver bullet potentially. That's why a SIM is critical. And these web application firewalls, next generation firewalls are critical because they give you the visibility to give you the analytics that you can use with the SIM. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Who has a SIM in their environment? That's the last. You have a SIM? Anyone have a SIM? You have a SIM? What do you think of your sim?
We just put it in.
Just put it in.
We're getting used to it, you know, it's just looking at real time, not doing anything, reporting on it.
Okay. Anyone want to give feedback on their sim?
Well, it's not logging all of the devices, it's just certain server.
Yeah. And you can't log everything because they have, limitations on how much retention they have and all that stuff. So you have to understand what's critical to your organization and log that.
I think the thing that, we're still well into the process of implementing the SIM, but it requires a level of knowledge about your applications and about normal behaviors and interacting with your developers and the guys who write the code to run these apps so that you can get that baseline. And because, the SIM's going to tell you what it tells you, but you still have to be in a position to have enough information about what you're seeing to make sense of the thresholds that you set.
Yeah.
Is this actionable or not? And like you said, there's the limitations on the events per second and all these things that you got that you got to keep in mind. So it's biting off a SIM implementation is
It's a lot. There's a lot of data. And there was an issue that was mentioned about, I think, I want to come back to that. Okay, I have an application background or programming background, and we have this network environment. And there's things called vulnerability scanners that can run and scan your environment that will give you information on vulnerability. So that will give you some insight on the other side of the house because I can use that for the application side of the house to scan and see what the application vulnerabilities because it's a skill set gap for myself. Now I have become more familiar with things like SDLCs, the processes, and some of the application security vulnerabilities because of my work. But security is a vertical for me. It's what I do at the organization, so I can focus on that and build up those gaps. But most of us do not have a full-time person dedicated to security. So we talked about how do you augment your staff. A SIM is a great way to augment your staff. It allows you to get information and have it at your fingertips. So you can start now, instead of trying to collect it, spending your time collecting it, you can focus on the analysis part of that. Also, vulnerability scanners help augment your staff. Getting information, and you can have some low budget, there's even open source scanners that you can use. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And what I like about the next generation firewall, it augments your staff because the reporting on some of these systems are incredible. It gives you so much more visibility, even without having a SIM. You'll see 10 times more than you ever thought you'd ever see from one box because it's URL filtering, it's intrusion prevention, it's IDing your applications. And that's a tremendous benefit. Because if you look at an ASA log, you're not getting anything out of that. A firewall log, you're not getting anything out of that. I slipped, I'm sorry. No vendors. Any other questions or comments?
Clarification.
Sure.
ID in an application. What it actually is it doing when it's ID in an application?
So let's say, who allows Facebook in their organization? Yeah, we do too. You can potentially permit Facebook, stop the games, stop posting, stop the videos, still permit Facebook. Because they can take the application and drill down to all the subsets. If you have Oracle, we're a PeopleSoft shop. I see PeopleSoft traffic. If I want to permit PeopleSoft only traffic to a certain segment, I can do that, not everything else. So if this segment is secure, public facing, I want just PeopleSoft traffic to go there, that's it, nothing else. No port creeping, doesn't fit this application profile, it's not happening. And you can integrate with Active Directory, so you can assign groups to the applications. Any other questions? So, do we feel like we architected the network to a certain level? Or do we see the gaps between our perceived protection and what we can actually, how we should actually layer it? So understand what you're trying to protect, understand what you have in place, and look to fill those gaps. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for participating. If you have any questions, see me afterwards, and I apologize for that vendor slip.